Okay, today we're going to start on Daf Mem Ches, Amud Aleph. It's 6-7 lines from the bottom. No, it's more than that. It's 8 lines from the bottom. Chatas minalan debayit safin. 48a. It's the bottom. It's an offering, right? Okay, thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. It's plus of our learning, we should have basic English. Learning for Shlema, be well. All those that need. And my father and Naftali ben Bela, Yaakov ben Fega. Anyone else? Okay, so the Gemara starts like this. Actually, I guess what you would want to know beforehand is that many of the sacrifices need to be slaughtered on the north side of the courtyard, and the source for that so far was the Korban Oila. And we asked, the Korban Oila is the main one that needs to be on the north, and that's the source for it. So why don't we start off with Maseches Zavachim Daf, and we should start off with the Oila, because that's the source for the other ones. We said, well, we start with the Chatas because that was Chaviva. That was more, because it's derived, so it's more precious. It's more precious to us. So we start with that. Anyway, right now we're holding Chatas minalan debayit safin. Where do we know that the Chatas needs tzafin? And we know that the Oila does. Where do we know that the Chatas does? Well, if we say the Ksiv, Pasuk says, I'm going to need a Chumash. It says, V'shachat es hachatas b'makayim ha'oila. Thank you. And the Pasuk is, above, Dalet Chavtes. We're talking now about a regular Korban Chatas. Regular Korban Chatas means if a regular individual doesn't have air. There's a lot of different types of Korban Chatas. Remember, we had if the Nasi does a sin, which means if the king does a sin, if the Kohen Gadol does a sin, if the community does a sin. Here we're talking about if just an individual does a sin. And over here it says that he can either bring he brings a female goat. That's what he brings, a female goat. But it was also a female sheep, right? And in the pasuk afterwards says or he could bring a female sheep. But in the pasuk by the goat it says, "V'shachat es hachatas b'makayim ha'oila." That's verse 29. He slaughters the chatas in the place of the oila. Now we know where the oila was slaughtered, on the north. Now when it speaks again about the sheep, it says, or if he brings a sheep, it says the same thing. V'shachat isa lechatas b'makayim asher yishchat es ha'oila. It does the same thing by both of them. Okay, whatever the case is, right now we have that it has to be slaughtered in the place where the oila, the burnt offering, was slaughtered. If that's the case, then we know already that it needs to be on the north, because that's on the north. Ashkechan shchita. See that the slaughtering of the chatas needs to be on the north. Kabbalah. What about receiving the blood? Minalan. Where do we know that needs to be on the person receiving the blood? The person or the it's not talking about the person yet. It's talking about the receiving of the blood. How do we know that needs to be on the north? Well, the Ksiv, it says, "V'lakach hakayin midam hachatas." Now, where is that pasuk? That is when we're dealing with the regular chatas, with the goat, which was the female goat, which was the first section of the Korban Chatas. It says, "V'lakach hakayin midama be'etzba'i v'nasan l'kanos hamizbeach." Okay, so this is "V'lakach hakayin." But when we're dealing with the sheep, it says, But it says first, so there's a, if I read it through, it says that where is it slaughtered? In the place where the oila was slaughtered, and the kayin shall take. So it continues on of the location where it needs to be slaughtered, it continues on to where the kayin should take it from. So this teaches me that the Kabbalah Saddam, the receiving of the blood, needs to be on the north.
But isn't that also like, don't you have to, as soon as you slaughter, get the blood? How would you slaughter one place, get the blood somewhere else?
If they schlepped it to the other, if they schlepped it on the border between the north and the.
All right on the border.
Man, you pulled it this way, pulled it that way. How do you know that that this detail is specific? So now look at this. Another detail in this. How do you know that was the receiving of the blood? How do you know that the kohen that's receiving the blood, if he's on the border, so maybe he could stretch his hand over to the north, receive the blood on the north, but his body is not on the north. How do you know that he needs to be on the north? So Makra Velakach, the pasuk says Velakach, and if you divide up that word Velakach, you'd read it as Lo Yikach, means he has to take himself. What does it mean to take himself? It means that he has to bring himself to the north, that he has to be standing on the north to get the blood. Okay, the Gemara says Ashkechan lemitzvah. So far you have Shchita and Kabbalah, but you only know that this is the way it's supposed to be done. Mitzvah over here means that this is the proper way to do it. However, la'akiv minayin, how do you know that it's so essential that if you didn't do it this way, the sacrifice would be invalid? Pasuk says, we have another pasuk. This is v'shachad oisai b'mekayim asher yishchad es ha'oila. You should slaughter it in the place where you slaughtered the oila. Now this happens to be talking about a different type of chatas. Where is this? This is hey. No, ches. Samachas yada vikra dalet of dalet. Okay. Here we have to go back from before the regular individual sin offering, which was Vayikra Daled 27. So that's 27 for the goat and 32 for the sheep, both female animals. If you go back to 22, then it says if a Nasi sins, and a Nasi means a king, the Jewish leader sins, and he'll do one of the commands that he wasn't allowed to. It says that he should rest his hand, he should lean his hands on the head of the goat. He should slaughter it in the place where he slaughters the oila in front of Hashem, chatasu. Shachat isai, slaughter it in the place where he slaughters the oila in front of Hashem, it's a chatas. So the Gemara says, Shachat isai mkayim asher yishchad es ha'oila, B'tanya, and it was taught in a brisa, Eichen oila nishchata, where it says you have to slaughter it in the same place as the oila. Where is the oila slaughtered? Batzafin, in the north. So after Batzafin, this should also be in the north. Okay. This is still the brisa talking. It says, "V'chimikana talamed." You learn it from here that it needs to be on the north. But we have another source. It says, where is this? This is much further on. This is the Yikra Vav Yudches. This is two chapters later. This is in Parshas Tzav. So, Daber al Aaron. This is additional laws of a sin offering, which is given to us in Parshas Tzav. Daber al Aaron v'albanav le'mezos teres achatas b'mkem she'tishachir ha'oila tishachir achatas l'nei Hashem kedush kedashimi. Ha'kayin ha'machati yasei yichalenu kol shigusay yikdash. These are additional laws of the chatas which are said here, and over here it says a general law of the chatas that it has to be slaughtered where the oila is slaughtered. So it says, why are you telling me that that you learn that it's slaughtered on the north from the pasuk by the Nasi, the goat of the Nasi, when he does a sin, we have the general law. It says, so why do I need by the Nasi that it needs to say it specifically? To establish its place as an obligation. Tell me that if it wasn't done like that, it's possible. We know this in general, that whenever anything is repeated by the karbanos, that means that it's ma'akiv. First time it says it means that that's the way you're supposed to do it. It doesn't mean that it's essential. But when it's repeated, that's la'akiv. Yeah, we have it all the time in there. You say that that's the reason why this is singled out, the sort of the Nasi, to teach me that it's ma'akiv. Maybe it's coming not to tell me that it's ma'akiv. Maybe it's coming to be a exclusion. Right? What does the pasuk say? First pasuk before this, it says, that you should slaughter it. Maybe it's coming to exclude other things. So, so the pasuk says by the regular person's sin offering, it says when he's bringing the goat, it says that you have to slaughter the chatas in place of the ayla. This is a precedent for all other chatas that they all need to be on the north. So it can't be excluding. It can't be an exclusion. What it says by the goat of the Nasi. Okay. So, where are we holding? We're holding that the goat of the Nasi has two sources. The goat of the sin offering of a king, of a Jewish leader. Since we have two sources that it needs to be slaughtered on the north. One is the general one, and then when it specifies by it that it needs to be slaughtered on the north. So it says that's a double law. It says twice. It's repeated. So that repetition is coming to teach me that it's ma'akiv. Maybe it's repeated to tell me an exclusion that only it needs to be on the north, but other sacrifices don't need to be on the north. We said we already have an inclusion for everything else. It can't be excluding anything. Ashkechan, the Gemara says, we find Sar Nasi bein l'mitzvah bein la'akiv. Find that the goat of the Jewish leader needs to be on the north, that it's a mitzvah and it's also essential. Shar chatais nami ashkechan l'mitzvah, but la'akiv minalan. We had a source for other chatais, other sin offerings that they need to be on the north. But how do we know that it's also essential? My answer is the ksiv b'kisva, the ksiv b'seira. We said before that when it has two options of what sacrifice you want to bring when someone has a sin offering, you could either bring a female goat or you can bring a female sheep. By both of them, it says that you should slaughter in the place of the Oila. That repetition tells me that it's ma'akiv. Ella, if that's the case, we already have it by a regular chatas that it's ma'akiv. Ella v'shachat, so it says Ella oisai, that pasuk of v'shachat oisai. Lamali, why do we need oisai? If every sacrifice, every carbon chatas needs to be on the north, so why does it say v'shachat oisai? It needs to be by the Jewish leader that sins. It sounds like an exclusion. The Gemara says, we need it for what it says in the Brisa. There was one time, many years ago, where there was an inauguration of the tabernacle, and over there we had the 12 princes brought their sacrifice. The first one was Nachshon, and it says that sacrifice, he also brought a goat, and that sacrifice did not need to be on the north. It was an inaugural sacrifice. It didn't need to be on the north. So where do we see that it doesn't need to be on the north? Well, we have an exclusion from here. This Jewish leader needs to bring a sacrifice. It needs to be on the north if he does a sin. But for the inauguration sacrifice that the princes brought, that doesn't need to be on the north. Yeah, so they brought a sin offering, saying one for a specific sin. So
You done with that tea bag?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, they're
done.
out downstairs. Thank you.
Oh. Just the cover. Okay. You have the Tanya. You have it in parentheses, Tanya. We'll start in the Brisa. Samach Yadei al Reish Asar says that when the prince, not the prince, it says when the Jewish leader brings his sacrifice, it says that he rests his hand, he leans his hand on the head of the goat. What does it mean on the head? That it elaborates. It says on the head of the goat. The rabbis, Seir Nachshan L'Smicha. Those extra words are coming to tell me that by the inauguration sacrifice, when Nachshan, it's called Nachshan because he was the first one. When he brought the sacrifice, he had to lean his hands. He had to lean his hands on the animal. In general, many of the karbanos is supposed to do smicha. You lean your hands on the animal. So it's coming to tell me that by his sacrifice, the goat that Nachshon brought, he also has to do smicha. That's Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says, "L'rabbis seiri avedis kechavim l'smicha." It's not coming to tell me the goat of Nachshon. It's coming to tell me a different sacrifice needs smicha. It means if the community committed worshipped idols, and they thought that it was permissible, and for whatever reason, and so they have to bring this goat. So that goat also requires smicha. There's a whole discussion who does the smicha on that. If it's but this is by the Helam Dover. We had a discussion if it's the Zakanim or if it's the Sanhedrin or if it's the community leaders. Who does the smicha? Whatever the case is, it needs smicha. That's what we're learning from the Samach Yadai al Reish Hasoyer. Reish Hasoyer is coming to teach me this, that the goat of Avodah Zarah needs a smicha. Now we have two options here. Al Reish Hasoyer is either telling me that Nachshon's the inauguration sacrifice needs smicha, or it's coming to tell me that the Avodah Zarah one needs smicha. If we follow Rabbi Yehuda, that is coming to tell me that Nachshon, the goat of Nachshon, needs smicha, so then I could have said like this: Sal kadai t'chamina would enter your mind to say, Hayol v'srabel smicha, since the goat that the Nesiim brought for the inauguration required smicha, srabenam l'tzafen, so it probably also requires to be on the north, because it's similar. Now you're comparing it very closely to the carbon chatas. So Kamash Malan, that's why I need to exclude it. The Isai is excluding it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that we're comparing it, Nachshon's sacrifice to a carbon chatas. So now we have to exclude it with Isai, with the word Isai. We're asking, what does the word Isai do for me? Sounds like an exclusion. We said it's excluding the carbon of Nachshon. Why would I even think that I needed to exclude that? Because I do a comparison for smicha, that you need smicha. So if I need a smicha, then now I have to exclude it, that it doesn't need to be on the north. Maskevla Ravina, so Ravina says, Hanichal Rabbi Yehuda. All you gained over here was one opinion why you need the word Isai. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, that he says that it's similar for smicha. But however, Rabbi Shimon, but according to Rabbi Shimon, that says that Isai is not telling me anything about Nachshon's carbon. Isai is Al Reish Asar is not telling me about Nachshon's carbon. Al Reish Asar is telling me about the goat of Avodah Zarah. So why do I need Isai to exclude the goat of Nachshon, according to Reb Shimon, where the goat of Nachshon was never included? I never had a comparison to the goat of Nachshon. That I have to exclude the goat of Nachshon from Tzafin, from being slaughtered by the north. Normally, Marzutra braid the Rav Tavi l'Ravina. Marzutra, Rav Tavi's son, says to Ravina, l'Rabbi Yehuda minicha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you think you have it all worked out. The fact that it was included for smicha, that's good for smicha. But the fact that it wasn't included for the north, why do I need a pasuk to tell me that you would have thought that it has to be on the north, and so therefore the pasuk tells me that it's not on the north. We never said anything about the north. You only said that it requires smicha. Maybe if I didn't have a special pasuk to exclude it from the north, could have said that maybe you compare it to we do a precedent that it needs to be on the north, because we learn it from the regular carbon chatas that needs to be on the north. Imkain smicha gufa teisei bibinyanav. If you can use binyanavs, I didn't know we could use binyanavs, just precedent. You want to tell me that we could use a binyanav and now you have to exclude it because of the binyanav. Binyanav just means we have a father structure, binyanav, which means precedent. Found it somewhere else, we'll say the same thing applies here. So you say, oh, if you want to say that I could have thought that it needs to be on the north because of a binyanav, because you find in one other place where a chatas needs to be on the north. So we also find in another place that it needs to have smicha. So then why do I need a pasuk to include it for smicha? So we have to say that we can't use the binyanav. Ella midaris legamrinan. It must be that we can't use the binyanav. We can't buy because you can't use a binyanav, a precedent, from regular sacrifices to the inauguration sacrifice. Midairis means for future generations. A regular sacrifice is for all generations. That was just a one-time event. So it must be midairis legamrinan. You can't learn from future generations. Achanami, if that's the case, then we won't know in the north either, because midairis legamrinan can't learn from a future generation. We're left right here where I don't really know what I'm doing with the word Isai, because if you thought maybe it's coming to exclude Nachshan, I never had any reason to include him. And if you say that you can use a precedent, then that's going to mess up other things, because why do I need to include him for smicha if I could use a precedent? It must be I can't use precedent. I can't use precedents. I have no source to even think that I should need the Isai to exclude it. Ella Isai Batzafin be'ina sheichet batzafin. Interesting halacha. The animal needs to be batzafin, needs to be on the north. But the one who's slaughtering doesn't need to be on the north. Now, what we said before is that the one that's catching the blood needs to be on the north. We didn't say the one that's slaughtering needs to be on the north. Maybe the one that's slaughtering can use a long knife, stretch it over, and do a shkita like that. Need good balance in his hand, but he could, with a long knife, if it's on the border, be able to show. Where it says, you're right. The slaughter doesn't need to be on the north. However, we have a different source for it. We don't need the word Isai. All we were trying to get over here is that the word Isai was coming to exclude. It says it needs to be on the north, but not something else. But if we have another source for this, then we don't need the word Isai to teach me that. What's our other source? Sheichet midrab Achia nafka. We learn it from what Rab Achia says. The Tanya was said in the Brayso of Achia Aimer. Achia says by the Karbanayla, it has to be slaughtered on the north side of the altar. Why does it have to tell me that? Because we find that the one that's receiving the blood needs to be on the north, and he has to receive it on the north. And if the one that's receiving the blood is standing on the south, then he stretches out a utensil with a long handle. And from the south, he stretches out this long handle vessel to the north, the kind of broomstick. And he receives it on the north. It's possible, because he also, the one that's receiving, also needs to be on the north. Maybe also the slaughterer also needs to be on the north. He can't stand on the south with a long knife. Could have thought so. Talmud Laimar, pasuk over there says by the oila, by the elevation offering, says Oisai. That specifically the animal needs to be on the north. Oisai betzafin ve'ein hasheichet betzafin. The slaughterer doesn't need to be on the north. So from the source of the sacrifices being on the north, I already know that the sheichet doesn't need to be on the north. So why by the chatas does it need to say Oisai, that it needs to be it on the north, but we would say not the sheichet? We already have a source by the oila, which is the source of the north, where the sheichet doesn't need to be on the north. So what we're looking for here is what the word Isai is excluding. So, and we lost an actual halacha. It's not excluding nachshen because we don't need that. It's not excluding the shaychit because we don't need that. So ella isai batzafin ve'in ben oif batzafin. When it comes to slaughtering a bird, which they do malika, they use the fingernail. That does not need to be on the north. The Tanya was taught in Rice. Yeah, Hillel, you wanted to say something? I'm not sure. Anyone know about that? Does the whole animal need to be on the north, or is it just the head of the animal needs to be on the north? Sounds like something that either the Gemara or the commentators would talk about.
If the animal wasn't on the north, then there would be no questions where the kohen standing. It wouldn't be room. He has to go around. So the kohen would always be on the north. But because we don't know where the kohen is, you have to say the whole animal was on the north.
He's saying, Josh is saying the whole animal.
Would the altar be big enough for a large animal?
So it's not actually slaughtered on the altar. It's slaughtered on the floor, and then the pieces are brought up the altar and burnt on the altar. But the altar was big enough for a large animal. Yeah, it's 32 by 32 amos. That's 60 something feet. It's a nice size, or 80 feet maybe. No, it's not 80. Not 80. It's about 60 feet. Okay. So now what we're doing with the word
you're allowed to stand on top of the behemoth?
It wouldn't stand on top.
Like this way? Then he has a good question.
But your feet have to be on the floor.
Yeah, the feet have to be on the floor. But at least for the other avodas, the feet have to be on the floor. I don't know about shechita.
No, we know avodah, he needs to be Muhammad. But can he be like over his feet are on the ground, but the head's like somehow, otherwise it's craziness. Yeah.
Okay. Tanya was studying in Brisa. Yachal ye ben oif turn suffered. Maybe I could think that maybe the bird that's slaughtered, they do malik on it. Maybe it needs to be on the north. Vidinu. And I can even say that this is something logical. Why would I think that it needs to be on the north? It says, "Uma ben sayin shleik kavalei kayin." When it comes to an actual animal, for example, sheep that are slaughtered, you actually don't need a kayin to do the slaughtering of a sacrifice of a sheep. And nevertheless, kavalei tzafin, it needs to be on the north. So ben oif shekavalei kayin. When it comes to the bird, where you do need a kayin, because he needs to do it with his fingernail. It's a special service that only a kohen can do. For sure needs to be on the north. When you're seeing that something has more restrictions, then we're going to apply the extra restrictions to it. If the bird needs a kohen, then for sure it needs to be on the north. So Talmud Laimar Oisai. So the pasuk says Oisai to tell me that I don't need to. The bird does not need to be slaughtered on the north. It's slaughtered on the side of the altar, but not on the north side. It's slaughtered on the east, right? Gemara says, 1 second. That wouldn't have told me that you need to do that the bird, I would have thought that the bird needs to be on the north. Mala ben Sain, when it comes to the animal, you can cover like keli. You have to use a knife to slaughter, and you need a utensil to catch the blood. So that is much stricter. When it comes to the bird, you don't even use a utensil to catch the blood, you just squeeze it onto the altar. Ella oisai batzafin ve'in pesach batzafin. Okay, so if I never thought that the bird would need to be on the north, so then Isai can't be excluding it. So what's Isai excluding? It's coming to exclude the Karban Pesach. Karban Pesach I could have thought was on the north. And the Tanya was taught in a brayso for Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. This is Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. It says Mishnasi Kavanaki. He didn't say a lot, but it's everything that he says is accurate. Yachal ye Pesach tan tzafan. I could have thought that maybe the Karban Pesach requires the north. Vidinu, and it's even logical. When it comes to a carbon oila, an elevation offering, there's no set day or set time when it needs to be brought. But nevertheless, it has a restriction of the north. So Pesach, which does have a set time, where it has a designated time, for sure it should have to be on the north if it's telling me about restrictions. Talmud Laimar, I saw, therefore the pasuk says, I saw, to exclude the Karban Pesach. I could have thought the Pesach needs to be on the north. Isai, which we say by the goat of the Nasi, of the Jewish leader that sins, tells me that specifically the Nasi and not the Karban Pesach needs to be on the north. Gemara says, Mala Ila Shekain Kalal. You're bringing from the Ayla that you could have thought that the Karban Pesach is more restrictive than the Ayla, and therefore it should need to be on the north. It's not true. The Ayla has more restrictions. The Ayla needs to be on the north because the Ayla is entirely burnt. The Karban Pesach is eaten. So the Ayla has restrictions. It's entirely burnt. It has to be on the north. So the Gemara says, well, the truth is, the Ayla does have to be entirely burnt, and the Karban Pesach seems to be more lenient than that. However, there is another sacrifice that's not entirely burnt, but also needs to be on the north. So you see, the determining factor of being on the north is not the fact that it's burnt, because we have other sacrifices that are on the north and aren't burnt. For example, chatas. The chatas would disprove that that question that tells me that the reason why the Ayla is on the north is because it's entirely burnt, and therefore you can't learn from that the Pesach should be on the north, because the chatas is also on the north and it's not entirely burnt. The chatas is eaten. Gemara says, Malachata, the chatas you can't compare. Chatas is an atonement for very serious sins, even sins of karas. So that's the determining factor that makes it on the north. But the Karban Pesach doesn't do that. Where it says, well, may Asham. Asham doesn't atone for Chai B'Krisis, and nevertheless it's on the north. So maybe the Karban Pesach as well. There's Mala Asham, Shkin Kachi Kachim. But the Asham is Kachi Kachim, is a holy sacrifice. Where it says, well, actually, when the Karban Pesach is not. Actually, come to think of it, Mikul and Nami, Shekain Kachi Kachim. All of them are Kachi Kachim, and the Pesach is not. So I wouldn't have thought that the Karban Pesach needs to be on the north. We just found a common denominator of all the sacrifices that need to be on the north, which leaves out the Karban Pesach, which tells me that the word Isai is not necessary to exclude a Karban Pesach. The Olam, the Gemara answers, the Gemara says, Kedamran mi kara. Like we said before, that Isai Batzafim ain't Sheichet Batzafim. That the animal needs to be on the north, but the slaughterer does not need to be on the north. The kashlach, you had a question, Midr Rabachia Nafkalan, that we learned that already from Rabachia. She said that you have to slaughter it.
How does he get the blood? It has to go to the north.
So we're talking about where he has a long handle, as a vessel with a long handle. No, the one that's catching the blood has to be on the north anyway. That we have another part.
Velokach.
Now we're talking about right, loikach, right, loyika. But now we're talking about the sheichet. The sheichet doesn't need to be on the north. He can use a long knife. And now we have a source for Rabachia, so we didn't need Isai to exclude that. Gemara says, Lav Lemute Sheichet Betzafen, Ella Ein Sheichet Betzafen Avol Mekabel Betzafen.
Yeah, because you asked from the Velokach, you said, how do we know Kabbalah? How do we know Kabbalah? Yeah.
Let's take a look at it like this. When it says that he needs to be on the north, the sheichet, when we said the sheichet does not need to be on the north, we're learning it from Isai, that the animal needs to be on the north, but not the sheichet. So we said, 1 second, I have another source that says that the sheichet doesn't need to be on the north from Rabachia. It says, you're right. The fact that the sheichet doesn't need to be on the north, that we have from Rabachia. What we're saying now is that the sheichet doesn't need to be on the animal needs to be on the north, but not the sheichet needs to be on the north. Not the sheichet needs to be on the north, but the makabel does need to be on the north. So it's an exclusion that's coming to include. It's a restriction on an exclusion. It's coming to tell me that only the sheichet doesn't need to be on the north. Isai, he needs to be on the north, but not the sheichet needs to be on the north, but the makabel does. It's one more step that we're learning from this. Gemara says, 1 second, makabel tzarech milakach v'lakach. It's supposed to be lakach layikach, probably. Nafka. We already learned that from the pasuk. The Gemara says, well, this opinion, lakach mivalakach leimashmalei. He doesn't learn from this. He doesn't use this limud. So he learns it from Isai that teach me that only the animal needs to be there, but not the sheichet. And that when it says not the sheichet, that means only not the sheichet, but the one that's receiving the blood does need to be on the north.
Doesn't need really like a long night. Like the animal could be on the north and then keep it standing
Right. Right. Could be on the border.
This is a silly question, but was there a line? Was there a line drawn between north and south?
Mason-Dixon line.
I was just gonna say that.
He wants you to repeat that. What was that?
It's a good question. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Mason-Dixon line.
It's,
Okay.
it's
The corner, we learned it, yeah.
the Civil War.
So there was a line drawn, so
Of northern aggression.
people up there knew where they were.
Where are you from?
I think the Mizbeach itself was the divider. The edge of the
No.
Mizbeach
The
onward.
line went through the middle of the Mizbeach.
No.
Didn't it?
Yeah, there was a line that divided the Mizbeach from the top to the bottom.
No, I mean north to south.
North to south, I think it says Al Yerech HaMizbeach Zefayna. That means that from the end of the Mizbeach onward would be the north.
Lifnei, yeah.
I don't know. I think I have this little book from Art Scroll that shows a different diagram.
Uh-huh.
There could have been a grout line, the tiles, the stones stopped and went, or
I don't know if you can see this.
That one,
You see that?
Yeah. Now that, if you notice, the Mizbeach ends over there, just about at the center of the temple of the doorway to the sanctuary.
Okay.
That's midway between the so the end of the Mizbeach would be the divider, according to that.
Okay.
There's machlokas exactly where the Mizbeach ends, if it ends in the doorway or if it ends further on. I get what you're asking. You're asking if it doesn't end, according to the opinions, that it doesn't end in mid-doorway, but then maybe there's areas on the side of the Mizbeach that's also considered the north. And then we would need a line to demarcation. Yeah, I didn't see that in the pictures, that there should be like a line on the floor or something. Yeah.
would be the diagram is like the altar.
The altar, and from there on is the north. That's what I'm suggesting. Does that make sense from the pictures that you have? Yeah. Well, the B is the main one, and other opinions say A and C also. But whatever it is, it's the edge from the edge of the altar.
So then would it be south? Anything below that would be considered south? It would be
Yeah.
not really, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You're asking if it should be east or west?
Yeah.
It's north.
south.
There's the north, and then there's the not
And,
north.
no. Okay.
Ashkechan. Okay, now the Gemara says Ashkechan shchita ba'ila lemitzvah. What do you see?
Compass. Now that you mentioned it, was like west.
Right.
North.
So we find that it's interesting because we're working a little backwards over here. We were already taught that if the karban chatas of the nasi was not done on the north of it's ma'akiv. But we already learned that by the chatas of the nasi. But for some reason we don't know that the karban oila, which that's the real source of the north, that's ma'akiv as well. Because the source of slaughtering on the north is from the oila. And whenever it says that you have to slaughter on the north, it says b'makayim asher tishchad oila, you have to slaughter. But the Gemara doesn't know ashkan shchita ba'oila l'mitzvah. I only know that it needs to be done for the mitzvah. Kabbalah nami l'mitzvah ashkechan. I also find that the receiving of the blood is a mitzvah, which mitzvah means that that's the way it's supposed to be done. L'chatchila. But b'diavad, shchita b'kabbalah la'akiv minalan, how do we know that b'diavad, after it's done, it would invalidate, it's so essential that it would invalidate the sacrifice? How do we know that that's the fact? Rabada barava v'tema rabba barshila mikal v'chaymer, we have a kal v'chaymer. If the chatas, which the only reason why we know that the chatas needs to be done on the north, is because we do it similar to where the oil is done, and it's ma'akeves. We learned that by the chatas, it's ma'akev, it's essential. Oila sheba chatas mikoicha and a din shema'akeves. So for sure, by the oila it should be ma'akev. The whole source of a chatas is from the oila, and by the oila it's essential, and by the chatas it's essential. So the oila should also be. Where it says 1 second, ma'alachatas came mechaber salchai v'krisis. Chatas is has unique halachas that it atones for very strict sins, very serious sins, and so maybe that's why it's makif if it's not on the north. The oila doesn't atone for such sins. Ravina says, Hakashalei Ravada Baraba. Ravada Baraba's question was as follows: Klum matzino tafel chamer meneker. Do you ever find that the secondary should be more stricter than the primary? Which means that the secondary, which is the chatas, is it possible that could be more stricter than the primary, which is the oila? The oila is the source for it. We would never have what's derived should be stricter than the source for what it's derived from. Amalei Marzuch Beider Rav Marla Ravina, he says, Veloy, you don't find that? He's going to give him 3 sources here. He says, first of all, I'm sorry? Oh, he switches Tavi to Mari. I didn't even notice that. Okay. Mari Laravina. Okay, Yeshakayach. Did you follow that? Hill pointed out that the Shita Mekabetza switches Marzucha Breder of Tavi, it said before, and now it says Marzucha Breder of Mari. So it says if the Shita Mekabetza switched it before, because we're going to see later that it's a different name. Yeah, just to make it symmetrical. But in Meiser, we find by Meiser, which is Meiser Sheni, when it comes to taking the second tithe, you have to take it to Yerushalayim. So it says that you could redeem it, right? You could redeem the second tithe. However, once it comes into Yerushalayim, it says Dehu Nifta. Let's say it becomes Tameh, and it's in Yerushalayim. You could redeem it. Be'ilu halakuach b'kesef meiser. But if you had redeemed it prior to coming to Yerushalayim, you get to Yerushalayim and then you buy food, and now that food becomes Tameh, then Einei Nifta. Then you can't redeem it, which comes out that if it was never redeemed yet and it becomes Tameh in Yerushalayim, you could redeem it. But if it was redeemed already once, it comes to Yerushalayim, it becomes Tameh, then you can't redeem it. It comes out that what's stricter? What came from the Meiser is stricter than the Meiser itself. The Meiser itself you could redeem. What came from the Meiser you can't redeem. Ditzanan, as was started in the Mishnah, because the Meiser Yipada, what's bought with the money of Meiser that became Tameh, you could redeem. But we're not asking on from that opinion. Rabbi Yehuda, you cover. Rabbi Yehuda says you can't redeem it. Which, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it comes out that what's purchased with money of Meiser, which meant that it was redeemed already once, you can't redeem it.
It's not necessarily that's stricter.
Right.
Because you can learn at the end if you say it loses the kedusha it had before, it's low, and therefore it's not. It's
very good. Very good. So the Gemara and Dr. Stein have the following answer, and they say Hassam over there when we say that what's purchased with the money of Meiser, we say that looks stricter. It's not actually stricter. It says Layalima kedushase lemitvas pidyaine. It's not. The holiness isn't powerful enough to grasp the secondary, right? In other words, it can't continue on to be redeemed again, because the holiness gets weakened every time it goes. So it's not a strictness of it. Okay, the Gemara says, well, maybe we have another source. Rei Tamura. What about Tamura? Interesting thing that a person is not supposed to exchange one animal for another animal, one sacrifice for another sacrifice. But listen to this: if he does, it becomes consecrated. Ilu kachim. When it comes to sacrifice, lechayli al balmum kavua. If someone points to a sacrifice, he says this is going to be a karban, and it turns out that sacrifice had a mum in it, with missing a leg or something. So the animal doesn't become a sacrifice; it just becomes holy for the temple. But it doesn't. The kedusha guf doesn't go on it because it has a mum. The ilu ihi. However, when it comes to Tamura, listen to this: if you have one animal that's already a sacrifice, and then you want to exchange it for another sacrifice, chayla, it will extend over to an animal that's a balmum. Tamura will go on to an animal. So the Gemara says, you see, the secondary is stronger than the primary, because Tamura it could become kaida, it could become get the kedusha of a karban when a primary animal can't, if it's a mum. So Tamura, the Gemara says, Tamura mikach kachim kasya. You're looking at it wrong. The Tamura, it's coming from the holiness of a sacrifice already. Therefore, it can go on a balmum. But kachim mikach chulun kasi. You're trying to create a holiness. You're taking it from mundane. It doesn't work like that. Similar to what we said before. Just coming from the other angle. Okay, now we have another source that maybe something that secondary is stronger than the primary. Pesach. If someone has a carbon Pesach, you don't need to lean on it when you offer the Pesach. You don't need to bring the flour and the oil to fit together with it, and you don't have to wave the chest and the thigh. However, if you have an extra carbon Pesach that wasn't sacrificed together with it because you designated an extra one just in case, right? So then you do have to do all of those things. You do have to lean on it, and it becomes a shlamim. So a shlamim, you have all those halachas. So you say meiser Pesach, what's left over from a Pesach, you do have to do this. You see, the secondary is stronger than the primary. The Korban Pesach itself you don't need, but what the additional, you do need these things. It says Pesach b'shayim meiser shana shlamim. It's not because it's secondary that makes it stricter. It's because it becomes a different sacrifice. Okay, so it turns out that we don't really have a source that you would have a secondary that's holier than that's stricter than the primary, which could be a source that if the carbon chatas, it has to be on the north and it's essential, then if the carbon oila, if the carbon chatas has to be on the north, it's essential, then the oila for sure does. Ibayasema, another source, Amar Kra, it says ha oila, the oila, which it didn't have to say, it's coming to tell me the makaima tehei, that it needs to be slaughtered in its place. And if it's not, then it would be hustle. Okay, we'll have to stop before the asham. Okay, let's leave it over here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Shakayach.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Asham. Okay, have a great day, everyone.
Shkar.
You.
So what about Ben, Bakuda?